And just to lighten things up a little bit before we get into the real hardcore discussion here, we have on the line attorney at law, Martin George. And as I promised, we told you that we're going to look at some of the legal implications with regards to the firing of Jwala Rambaran as central bank governor and his, I guess, his threat or his announcement of his intention to pursue this matter in the courts. Good morning, Mr. George. Compliments of the season to you. Thank you for joining us on the line.
Hi, good morning to you, Stacey, and good morning, Trinidad and Tobago, and good morning to all your viewers.
So, Mr. George, I know you're a man who keeps abreast of all that is happening countrywide, and I know you have been looking at the development so far in terms of the firing of the central bank governor. Can you tell me what your opinion is now with this latest update in terms of the Jwala Rambaran now indicating that he will pursue this matter in the court?
Well, the thing is, we have to look at the circumstances that are playing out here. The first thing you have to ask yourself is whether the dismissal was valid or lawful. That would be the nub of the issue. In other words, do you have an inalienable right to hold on to the position of governor of the central bank? Now, under the Central Bank Act of Trinidad and Tobago, under Chapter 7902 of the laws of Trinidad and Tobago, under Section 7, it says that the governor shall be appointed for a term of 5 years. Now, as it is, you would recognize that this governor has not yet served that 5-year term. So one would imagine that certainly, from that aspect, he would be, seeking to say, well, my term of office has been cut short. But of course, that's not the end of the matter. The point is you do have the supervening powers of those who have appointed you, who also have the power to remove you from office. And one would imagine that if it is that a strong enough case has been made and the president or acting president, in his or her discretion, considers that, look, it is appropriate to remove you as governor of the central bank, then of course they do have that power also under the law. I would imagine from the thrust and gravamen and tenor of what I have seen in the media as Mr. Rambaran's response, I would imagine that the main plank of his argument would be the procedure and manner in which the dismissal was effected. So I am not sure that he would be seeking at all to suggest that he cannot be removed. I would think that it would be that he is seeking to challenge the manner in which it was done. I think he's suggesting that, look, there has not been sufficient consultation, there has not been sufficient due process, there has not been sufficient, opportunity for him to be heard, to ventilate his side of the story. In fact, if I recall correctly, I think he did indicate that he was not given the chance to respond to any complaint, in terms of any official complaint against him or against his actions. So I think it's in those circumstances he is looking to say, well, look, the way that this has been done has not been proper and is in breach of the fundamental principles of natural justice. Now, when one looks at the provisions of Section 12 of the Central Bank Act, Chapter 7902, you will see that it says that the president may terminate the appointment of the governor or deputy governor or any director, right, if that person, A, becomes of unsound mind or incapable of carrying out his duties, B, becomes bankrupt or compounds with or suspends payments to his creditors, and then you go on to several other things, convicted of and sentenced to a term of imprisonment, convicted of any offense involving dishonesty, is guilty of misconduct in relation to his duties, right? And then you have absence, then you have failed to comply with Section 16.1, and then you have contravenes any provision of any prescribed code of ethics in respect of which he is liable to termination of his appointment. Okay? And then you have under G, fails to carry out any of the duties or functions conferred or imposed on him under the Act. So one would imagine that it would be either G or maybe FB or the provision involving the earlier one that I spoke of in terms of the question of contravenes any provision of any prescribed code of ethics.
Mr. George?
In respect of which he's liable. Yes.
Yes, Mr. George. So what you're saying is that in terms of his argument would be, it's based mainly in terms of procedure. But today I read an article this morning in the newspaper talking from the finance minister's stance where they are actually contradicting that, saying that he was given an opportunity to respond and which he chose not to. Well, at least that is my interpretation of what I read. In that case, how in terms of when you're building the case against Mr. Rambaran's claims, how do you tackle those claims in the law?
Well, the point is those are factual issues, and you'd have to look at the circumstances of what is said, what is responded to. And the point is, remember, all of this is just public speculation at this point. Nothing has been filed yet in the court, so therefore we don't have any evidence to consider. And that's what a court always has to act on. What is the evidence before you? And you would recall that in the case of Nizam Mohammed, he did challenge his dismissal when he was dismissed as head of the chairman of the Police Service Commission by then President Maxwell Richards. He challenged it on the issue of procedure, not to say that the president did not have the power to dismiss him. So let's understand that. I don't think at all anyone can really attempt to mount a case to say you don't have the power so to do. So it would always be the manner in which it was done. And it's basically a similar type of allegation that Mr. Nizam Mohammed made when he said that, you know, it's the procedure and that he wasn't given sufficient opportunity to respond. So therefore, he brought his action, and the matter was heard before Justice Judith Jones, as she then was, and she ruled in his favor. And, you know, she felt that, you know, procedurally, it was improper, the manner in which it was done. So one would imagine that it's along similar lines that Mr. Rambaran will be seeking to make his claim. And, of course, one would imagine the government and the president would have the acting president would have their response and their answers to, you know, counter that. And, of course, the court would decide it based on the evidence that is placed before it.
Mr. George, some question has been raised in terms of not only the timing of the whole firing, but as well as the fact that the president was not the one and that there was an acting president who was the one who pushed through this this decision.
That's a specious and esoteric and largely irrelevant argument, because if we recall as far back as in 1990, you had the acting president, Emmanuel Carter, who was the one who signed the amnesty for the members of the Jamaat al-Muslimin. Once you are acting in the office, you are imbued and invested with all the powers, authorities, rights, privileges, duties of the substantive office holder in terms of carrying out the official functions. So whether it's the president or the acting president who does it, it makes absolutely no difference. I saw someone, I think in the Guardian newspaper, wrote a whole editorial along those lines, you know, suggesting that, maybe if Mr. Carmona was there, there's absolutely no moment or merit to that argument, because the acting president has the power to do just as the president would do or wouldn't do. But the point is, once you are there acting in that capacity, the decision and the discretion is yours. One would recall on many occasions we had circumstances where former acting president Timothy Hamel-Smith was called upon to make decisions and take decisions and do things when the substantive president, Mr. Carmona, was out of the country. So therefore, it's the same scenario here. So there really isn't any, any merit to that argument at all.
And just so, for some of us who are wondering, okay, so Mr. Rambaran pursues this matter in the courts, and say by some chance he wins the matter, that means that he will be reinstated as central bank governor, what is the whole...
There can be no question of reinstatement in such circumstances, because at the end of the day, you recall that your central bank governor has to be someone who has the recommendation and the blessings and the imprimatur, so to speak, of the government of the day. If you don't have that blessing or, that sanction from your government, there's no way a president can impose such a person on the country as central bank governor. So there will absolutely be no question of reinstatement. I think what we are dealing here with would be feelings of, hurt pride and, anger and angst at the fact that you have been dismissed and you have been removed from office, because you recall it's not very often that this type of action is taken. We did have a previous instance, I think, with Mr. Uric Bob in the past in Trinidad and Tobago, but it's not something that happens very often at all, and one must understand the importance and responsibility that goes with the role of being a central bank governor. The point is, generally speaking, the rule of thumb as a central bank governor is the less you speak publicly, the better for the entire country. That's the basic rule of thumb. You recall, when we go back to, we've had a very rich and fecund history of, very, good central bank governors who've always commanded international standing. We've had William Dimas. We've had Victor Bruce. We've had persons who've always carried that sense of dignity and responsibility, and that is what is required of the office holder, because your statements can create such an economic shakedown that you must always speak with moderation, discretion, and as I say, the less you speak publicly on the overall financial scenario or the economy, the better. I mean, of course, you have your statutory reports that you must give out, but apart from that, you must avoid capricious and, I would think, off-the-cuff statements which have the effect of, shaking your economy or, trembling the foundations of your financial system. If you look at in the U.S. with the chairman of the Federal Reserve, you'd recognize that the chairman of the Federal Reserve hardly ever makes public pronouncements. And whenever there is the need to make any public pronouncement, the chairman of the Federal Reserve always, it's something that's anticipated. The entire nation is on pause waiting for this announcement, because you recognize and understand the importance of the position you hold and the effect of your statements, and the tremendous effect they can have on boosting confidence or shaking confidence in your nation's economy. So therefore, one must always err on the side of caution, and it's better you say nothing than run the risk of saying something which can have a damaging or deleterious effect, because you're not only shaking the confidence of your economy, but you also think in terms of internationally and the view of investors. I understand this story was carried on Fox News internationally, so therefore you are in a global village. So therefore, you have to, at all times, seek to preserve the fragile economy that you are managing and the confidence of your local persons and your foreign investors in that economy.
A quick question here, Mr. George. Taking all of what you just said into consideration, what is your view in terms of this whole Forex announcement where the Jwala Rambaran named the Forex thing, because we understand that the part of this decision to fire him was based on his announcement and the possible breach of confidentiality with regards to these names, the Forex users?
Well, the thing is, I would think that if it is that he wanted to do that, first of all, one would have had to wonder as to what's the motivation or the effect that he was trying to achieve. Is it that it was an attempt at genuine public education, or was it as a means of deflecting attention from, criticisms, which, I mean, one has to be, honest and accept the fact that he's received a large amount of criticism during his tenure. Maybe, as is being said, it has been self-inflicted. I don't know. I make no pronouncement on that whatsoever. But the point is, it would appear that it was as a shield to say, well, look, don't attack me. Look, these are the persons who have been consuming your foreign exchange. But the point is, I don't think it was really necessary to name individual companies or corporations.
Right.
While you want to get that point across, you could have simply dealt with sectors. You could have said, well, the manufacturing sector, the automotive sector, the retail, industry, the food service industry, that type of thing. And you could have looked at it that way. But just on that point, I would like to, just question something which I don't know. I haven't heard any of our, leading commentators pick up on this point. One of the largest consumers, in fact, the one he named as the largest consumer of our local source of foreign exchange, appears to be a U.S.-based company. And one wonders if it is proper and correct that a company which is essentially headquartered in the U.S., regardless of the fact that they may be incorporated locally, but their parent company is in the U.S.
Okay, thank you, Mr. George. We have to wrap it up here. We have the 6:30 headlines coming up. Thanks so much for your time and giving us that legal perspective. We go to a short break now, and I'll be back with that 6:30 headline for you.